Join us at Women of Courage and celebrate the achievements of women. One of the most important activities you and I can participate in is going to the polls to vote. Our very lives depend on us voting. This may sound extreme, but it is not. Almost everything that occurs in our lives has something to do with the legislature of our state. We are governed by laws made by elected people to tell us what we can and cannot do in our personal lives and in our professional lives. Therefore, it would behoove all of us to make time to vote during every election, no matter what. Nothing should come before voting. Standing in long lines for hours is an arduous task, but if we do not want to lose our right to be self-governed, standing in line we must. During this show, in part 2, I'm going to introduce various clips from news shows where they discussed what took place in various current events that supports the proposition that we must always vote lest we allow these rogue agents from the opposing party to enact laws that will destroy our lives. These people have demonstrated that they care nothing about anyone or anything. The only thing they care about is money and power. And they will do anything they can to remain in power no matter what, including destroying their own country by destroying our democratic government. This form of government is the only reason why black men are not being lynched wholesale in this country. We do have laws to punish the bad actors who seek to annihilate the black man. Here are some of the short videos I would like for you to hear. Thank you.
On July 4th, 2018, after the Senate Intelligence Committee confirmed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, 8 Republicans were at the Kremlin doing a photo op with high-ranking members of Vladimir Putin's regime.
Lawmakers traveled to Moscow this week on a Republicans-only trip to Russia.
One Russian official said the 8 Republicans were soft and that the meeting was one of the easiest of his life. Senator Ron Johnson even downplayed Russian election interference just days after his 4th of July trip to Moscow, and after Putin illegally invaded Ukraine and started shelling cities full of civilians. Ron Johnson went on Fox News to blame President Biden.
I don't think Vladimir Putin would have moved on Ukraine were it not for the weakness displayed certainly by the Biden administration, but also by the West in general.
If these senators were truly worried about Russia, why did they all vote to block 3 separate election security bills? Why did they cover for Trump when he withheld crucial military aid to Ukraine? Why have they all consistently taken Putin's side? Vladimir Putin has shown that his goal is to destabilize Western democracy. From Ukraine to the U.S., we can't allow his puppets to sink their claws deeper into our government. America, vote out Russia's Republican allies in 2022. On July 4th, 2018, after the Senate Intelligence Committee confirmed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, 8 Republicans were at the Kremlin doing a photo op with high-ranking members of Vladimir Putin's regime.
Lawmakers traveled to Moscow this week on a Republicans-only trip to Russia.
One Russian official said the 8 Republicans were soft and that the meeting was one of the easiest of his life. Senator Ron Johnson even downplayed Russian election interference just days after his 4th of July trip to Moscow, and after Putin illegally invaded Ukraine and started shelling cities full of civilians. Ron Johnson went on Fox News to blame President Biden.
I don't think Vladimir Putin would have moved on Ukraine were it not for the weakness displayed certainly by the Biden administration, but also by the West in general.
If these senators were truly worried about Russia, why did they all vote to block 3 separate election security bills? Why did they cover for Trump when he withheld crucial military aid to Ukraine? Why have they all consistently taken Putin's side? Vladimir Putin has shown that his goal is to destabilize Western democracy, from Ukraine to the U.S. We can't allow his puppets to sink their claws deeper into our government. America, vote out Russia's Republican allies in 2022.
Leading off our discussion tonight, Claire McCaskill, former Democratic senator from Missouri and an MSNBC political analyst, and Joy Reid, host of the Readout at 7 p.m. Eastern on this network. The frustrated Joy Reid is leading off our discussion. Joy, I followed you on Twitter, live tweeting the hearing today. I saw the precious few minutes you got at the end of your 7 p.m. hour because of the way that the testimony went today, and I thought Joy has a lot more to say. And so, Joy, we begin with you and the open mic. Go ahead.
You are so merciful, Lawrence. You could feel my frustration, I think, through my Twitter feed. You know, I watched this all day, as you did. And let me just start with just what we know from having watched this today very quickly. So we know that these senators don't know the difference between what judges do and what they're supposed to do, right? They kept questioning Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson about her ideas on the way legislation should be formed in terms of sentencing guidelines. That's their job. I haven't seen Tom Cotton's legislation or any of their legislation to try to change said sentencing guidelines, as you just showed. We know that they don't care about protecting women and girls. We know that they don't care about protecting them from things like rape or child pornography because they fully support one justice who caused the phrase long dong silver to be entered into the congressional record, Clarence Thomas. And they fully support Justice Kavanaugh, who was credibly accused of sexual violence against a teenager in high school. So we had a lot of Josh Hawley fulminating about protecting children from pornography, et cetera, and Tom Cotton going on about protecting women from rape, et cetera. They supported fully Justice Kavanaugh and were outraged that anyone would ask him about these 3 credible accusations of sexually violating teenagers and college students, okay? So we know they don't really care about that. They also fully support Donald Trump, who has 26 accusers, going all the way from having leered at teenage girls at beauty pageants he was in charge of to rape in the case of E. Jean Carroll, all the way up to 26 accusers. So we know they don't care about any of that. We also know they don't care about the rule of law because they refuse to convict Donald Trump of fomenting an insurrection, which Josh Hawley raised his fist to support in real time. So we know they don't care about any of that. Rule of law, the law, none of it. What they care about is performing. Because their real job, much like Margie Green, is not to legislate, it is to perform for the Fox News audience, to perform for far-right voters who were terrified that their children would learn that slavery was bad and that slaves weren't happy and singing in the fields. They're terrified, and so they want to perform for that audience so that they'll vote. And so what I saw today was the performance of QAnon ideology, trying to tie this woman who has perfect integrity that Lindsey Graham has voted for twice to be on the federal bench, to try to tie her to child pornography because they know that's going to activate QAnon voters in November. It was pure performative, it was repulsive, and it was purely thuggish, in my view.
And Senator McCaskill, through it all, we still saw the most qualified Supreme Court nominee who's ever appeared in a televised confirmation hearing.
First of all, I hate to interrupt Joy, because I know she's got a lot more to say about this. Let me start with a very important premise here. This woman that was in front of the Judiciary Committee was brilliant, absolutely brilliant on the law, in her demeanor. This was a woman wearing a velvet glove with a steel spine. She didn't let them rattle her. She showed how she will be able to get along with others, which is important in the close confines of 9 justices on the Supreme Court, to try to win people over to your perspective on cases that could go either way. We hope we will get back to those cases someday. So I think we got to give a lot of credit to her. Secondly, this was a whack-a-mole game of hypocrisy. Every time I thought the Republicans had reached a new level of hypocrisy, whoops, up it came again. Whether it was them lamenting dark money, give me a break. The only reason we have dark money is because they love it. They won't clean it up. We've given them a million opportunities to clean it up. They won't vote for it. They love dark money. They are the princes of dark money. And the hypocrisy about downward sentencing from the guidelines. They have so many judges they've supported and that sit on the bench, appointed by Republicans, confirmed by them, that have had downward sentences from the guidelines. If any of these guys had ever been in a courtroom for a sentencing, they would know this is not that unusual. And so they cherry-picked a couple of cases to try to make America believe that this mother, this amazing woman, somehow likes pedophiles and child pornographers. Nobody believes that except that little rigid QAnon crowd that they're all playing to, that 25% of America that still think the guy at Mar-a-Lago tells the truth.
Joy, I've been wanting to ask you about this remarkable display and story of sisterhood that we heard yesterday in the introductions, where Ketanji Brown Jackson's college roommate, who she joined as a roommate when she was a sophomore at Harvard. This is a life experience, you know, and all 4 of these black girls who were sophomores at Harvard College get together as roommates. They all go on to Harvard Law School together. They all become great and distinguished lawyers and law professors and federal judge. And here is one of them going on to the Supreme Court. That is just a remarkable story of sisterhood that I was hearing, with, I'm sure, some commonalities in your experience in that same Harvard College environment around the same time.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, Ketanji Brown Jackson is younger than me. She was a couple years behind me in school. But, I mean, it is remarkable. First of all, the fact that they've remained friends for 3 decades, right? I mean, these were lifelong friendships that they formed. These bonds that they formed are so beautiful. You know, there's pictures in some of the great articles. Aaron Haynes did a fantastic interview with them. And, you know, they were in each other's weddings. Like, they're still best friends, which is wonderful. The introduction had so many people tearing up because they formed that lifelong bond in an environment, at least when we were there, that was only about 6, 7, 8% black. There were very few African-American students there. And there was this atmosphere that we've seen in these hearings of questioning whether you belong there, of white students who were there because of a legacy, because they had a grandfather or a great-grandfather that allowed them to be there because they had the same surname, literally questioning whether you, even though you were president of your class, in her case, president of her class, even though she was a stellar student in Miami, they would question your presence there. And we're seeing that these, you know, young people who at the time felt like they had the privilege to say only white people inherently belong here are now grown up. And now they're in the United States Senate. And they're just as inadequate as somebody who only gets into a school because their daddy can get them in or their grandparents have their name on a building. Literally telling you who worked your behind off to get there, who got straight A's in school, who did everything right to tell you you don't belong. Those people are now grown up, and they're Tom Cotton, and they're Lindsey Graham. And they're entitled, and they are arrogant, and they think they know better. But she stood there with the integrity of that friendship, of that group, who all of them went on to be successful. You know why? Because they were extremely smart. That's why they got into Harvard, right? They had to work their way in. They couldn't get in because they had family connections. So I think this is a great lesson for the way that black women have to overperform just to get to where people who are far far less intelligent and far less worthy get for free. She's going to get on that court, and she's going to be the smartest person on it, and it's going to make Lindsey Graham and the rest of his friends just burn.
I nominate Joy Reid to produce that documentary for MSNBC Films of those 4 girls who get together as sophomores at Harvard College and where they are now.
I would do that in a heartbeat. I would love that.
Rashida's listening. Senator
Yes.
McCaskill, before we go, I got to ask you, what happened to the tough chairman? If anyone had ever dared to ask a witness in the Senate Finance Committee or the Environment and Public Works Committee before that, when I was sitting there behind Chairman Moynihan, if anyone ever dared to ask a witness about religious affiliation, that senator would have been slammed down instantaneously and not allowed to ask another question. What is going on here?
I think Dick Durbin has made a calculation which may turn out, frankly, to be correct, and that is if he is accommodating, then they're going to keep talking, and the more they keep talking, the worse it gets for them. This Marsha Blackburn that was just questioning, I mean, really, the children's books, talk about tell me what your faith is. None of those things are ingratiating these guys to voters that they need to become president of the United States. They may win a race for the Trump faction, but they're not going to win a race of most Americans who see what they're doing as terribly off-topic distortion, distraction from the incredible qualifications of this woman. And they couldn't touch those. And they couldn't touch her legal mind or her knowledge of the law. And I think Dick just took the attitude, I'm not going to get accused of trying to shut anybody down. I'm just going to let them kind of get in the hole and keep digging.
Claire McCaskill and Joy Reid, the perfect way to start off this discussion tonight. Thank you both very much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
We'll have more on the confirmation hearing with Professor Michelle Goodwin and Rakeem Brooks next.
The framers were concerned about government overreach in a lot of different areas. The provisions of our Constitution are protecting individual liberty from government overreach. This is why we have provisions about limited government, and there are many provisions in the Constitution that are limiting government action when it comes to the deprivation of liberty, because the framers understood how important liberty is to our society. And so there's the Fourth Amendment, there's the Fifth Amendment, there's the Sixth Amendment, there's the Eighth Amendment. These provisions are crucial, and it is zealous defense counsel that ensures that the government is protecting these rights, that ensures that these rights are protected and that people are getting due process in the criminal justice system.
And joining us now, Michelle Batcher Goodwin, Chancellor's Professor at the University of California, Irvine Law School, and host of the podcast On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin. Also with us, Rakeem Brooks, President of the Alliance for Justice and a public interest appellate lawyer. Professor Goodwin, let me begin with you. And the reason we showed that particular piece of her testimony is this is one of those rare moments where we have a Supreme Court nominee who has actually represented criminal defendants in courtrooms in trials.
That's right. And let's be clear, this is critically important. The first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, protects individuals from the tyranny of the state. As she enumerated, many of those amendments directly speak to protecting people who have been accused of crimes by the government and protecting their interest. It's something that previously was a revered aspect of our Constitution, and we appreciated the public servants who dedicated themselves to serving on behalf of people who are indigent criminal defendants, such as then public federal defenders or just public defenders, those who represent people at the state level. So this is a noble calling that she has taken up in the past. And unfortunately, what we've seen is a kind of level of scorched earth politicking today with regard to what otherwise has been perceived and understood as a very noble calling. And in fact, the importance of zealous advocacy, which is not just something that lawyers can put up or put down, but is actually required by a code of ethics that lawyers must adhere to. She doesn't get to choose.
Rakeem Brooks, what did you take away from the hearing in terms of important points made by the nominee?
Ultimately, what we witnessed was her sheer brilliance. I just smiled watching the clip at the very beginning. We all know how extraordinary she is from day one, but today that was on display for multiple hours under really grueling conditions. And I think the point that she made most clearly was that she really is a judge's judge. She looks at the facts, she looks at the law, and she applies it equally regardless of the parties before her. She's not favoring the wealthy and the powerful. She's not favoring any party. What she does as a judge is looks at the facts, looks at the law, and applies it. And so many times Republicans tried to corner her and say, are you a originalist or a textualist, as a way of trying to almost say that those were the neutral principles by which our legal system should be governed. And the truth is those principles are not are at all neutral. They tilt in a particular direction, and she avoided that because she's a judge's judge. She looks at the facts, looks at the law, and applies it.
Professor Goodwin, I think in especially the most recent confirmation hearings, the last few decades, we've been seeing some very carefully constructed resumes, nominees from Democratic presidents and Republican presidents, and you can see caution in those resumes, including if I'm going to work as a trial lawyer in a criminal case, it better be prosecutor, because they'll be okay with that in Senate confirmation hearings. There's just a whole set of career choices you can see people making. And here we see a nominee who made the risky choice of saying, no, I will stand up as a federal public defender for whoever is assigned to me. She didn't even get to choose who she would be representing. What message does that send to young lawyers, people in law school now, who are thinking about just how do they want to shape their resumes so that they might someday be able to get through one of these hearings?
Lawrence, I'm glad that you asked that. There are two things that come through and more. One is her integrity, because you're absolutely right. There are law students who become nervous about even the potential of becoming a law clerk based on what they may write. And what we saw today was pure courage and integrity that has spanned a career. But there's something else that we've seen, given some of the vitriol and some of the unfair innuendo and inflammatory attacks. We see the strength that Black mothers pass on to their daughters, their granddaughters, and their nieces, and that is to walk through fire. And what we've seen is her ability to do that with poise, grace, and dignity under questioning that, as you mentioned, would have been off the table at another time.
Rakeem Brooks, what about that point that law students, young lawyers, are very carefully shaping their resumes for these kinds of moments, and Judge, this nominee is showing you that you might be able to do some things that you didn't think you could do?
I think it's incredibly important, and Professor Goodwin is exactly right. She's teaching law students all the time who are making calculations about what their careers will look like. And for the first time, they're going to look up at the Supreme Court in just a few months and see someone who honors one of our most cherished rights, right? When we think about Miranda, right before they tell you, that before they put you in cuffs, they tell you have an entitlement to a lawyer. And if you cannot afford one, one will be provided to you. It is as bedrock a principle in American law as anything. It's what makes us free. And for a long time, people avoided that to some extent because they were afraid that at confirmation hearings, just as we saw today with Senators Cruz and Senators Hawley, that they would be attacked for representing clients and defending that constitutional right. No more. Now law students will look ahead and say, she stood there with courage. She defended the Constitution as she has her entire career. And now she moved on to the Supreme Court, where she will continue to defend the Constitution of the United States. It's a glorious moment for us all.
Rakeem Brooks and Professor Michelle Goodwin, thank you both very much for joining our discussion. And coming up, President Zelensky told...
I am going to pause for a second to take a short break while you listen to information regarding willpower and encouragement. It is all a matter of learning new behaviors. And please remember, it is easier to build strong minds than to repair injured people. What I said is a modification of a quote by Frederick Douglass. He said, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Now,
life is at its best when you get to the mountaintop. Nevertheless, at times we lose our way and land in the valley. Adversity comes and shakes us in fear. What do you do at such a time? Where do you get your strength when it's gone? Be Not Defeated in Hard Times is the book you need to overcome such fears and gain back your strength. It's cheap, $10.95 only. To purchase this book, log into https://touchedbythelight.us/regular-publications before it's out of stock.
While there were certainly some contentious moments, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson really having to defend her record hour by hour yesterday, pushing back on oftentimes fierce lines of questioning from her Republican critics.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
This second day is known affectionately by a term of medieval justice known as the trial by ordeal.
With that warning, hours of intense questioning from senators followed, and so was the firestorm from the Republican camp. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina questioned her defense of Guantanamo Bay detainees.
Do you believe that's true, that America was acting as war criminals in holding these detainees?
Senator, the Supreme Court held that the executive branch has the authority to detain people who are designated as enemy combatants for the duration of the hostilities. And what I was doing in the context of the habeas petitions at this very early stage in the process was making allegations to preserve issues on behalf of my clients.
The sentencing of people convicted of child pornography was another contentious issue on display, as some Republicans charge that she is soft on crime.
And do you think that these laws are too tough, that we're too tough on sex offenders? Explain what you meant in this case in 2013, and it seems to be the same thing you said many years ago.
Senator, it's not the same thing I said many years ago. Many years ago, as a law school student, I was evaluating a new set of legislation, state laws about registration, and I was analyzing them as law students do.
Jackson pushed back, denying that she was lenient on sentencing in these cases.
As a mother and a judge who has had to deal with these cases, I was thinking that nothing could be further from the truth. These are some of the most difficult cases that a judge has to deal with.
Other Republicans, such as Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, questioned Jackson on some other broad culture war topics.
Critical race theory frames all of society as a fundamental and intractable battle between the races. It views every conflict as a racial conflict. Do you think that's an accurate way of viewing society in the world we live in?
Senator, I don't think so, but I've never studied critical race theory and I've never used it. It doesn't come up in the work that I do as a judge.
Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee closed out the marathon day of hearings with a question for Jackson on gender identity.
The word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the law and I decide.
And another line of questioning focused on the nominee's judicial philosophy. Jackson told the Senate Judiciary Committee how she would approach her job if confirmed.
I have developed a methodology that I use in order to ensure that I am ruling impartially and that I am adhering to the limits on my judicial authority.
As expected, Democrats gave Jackson plenty of opportunities to not only push back on the GOP attacks, but to speak directly to the American people about her life story.
Hopefully you all will confirm me, seeing me moved to the Supreme Court, that they can know that you don't have to be perfect in your career trajectory. But if you do your best and you love your children, that things will turn out okay.
And Ketanji Brown Jackson will be back up here on Capitol Hill today. She'll be facing the second round of questioning, the final round of questioning, Brianna, and that hearing is set to kick off in just a few hours.
All right, we'll be watching with you, Sunlen. Thank you so much for that report. And joining me now is CNN reporter Daniel Dale. Daniel, many things to fact check. I think you were very busy yesterday, so let's go through some of these. Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who we just saw, but this is on Judge Jackson's attitude toward people who oppose abortion.
You made your views on pro-life and the pro-life movement very clear. And in fact, you attacked pro-life women. And this was in a brief that you wrote. You described them, and I'm quoting, hostile, noisy crowd of in-your-face protesters, end quote.
All right, what did you find here?
This was really misleading, Brianna. Senator Blackburn tried to repeatedly suggest that Judge Jackson had expressed general disdain toward women who oppose abortion, that Jackson had broadly disparaged pro-life women as a hostile, noisy crowd. But Judge Jackson did not do that. Here is what actually happened. In 2001, when Jackson was a young lawyer in private practice, she co-authored a brief on behalf of clients who operate and support abortion clinics. The brief was in favor of so-called buffer zones outside clinics, zones where pro-life activists aren't allowed to go up to patients. And Jackson and her colleagues wrote that activists who get in the faces of women outside these clinics, shouting at them, blocking their way and such, are a hostile, noisy crowd. So Jackson was most certainly not insulting, say, pro-life women sitting at church, as Blackburn hinted later in her questioning. You can find this brief yourself from Jackson online if you just Google the phrase hostile, noisy crowd. It does not say what Blackburn suggests.
Okay, so next, Republican Senators Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and John Cornyn of Texas claiming Jackson had described the U.S. government in general or President George W. Bush specifically as a war criminal.
You know, I've been a lawyer too, but I don't think it's necessary to call the government a war criminal in pursuing charges against a terrorist. I just think that's too far. I don't know why he chose those words. That's just too far.
You referred to the Secretary of Defense and the sitting President of the United States as war criminals. Why would you do something like that? It seems so out of character.
What did you find?
Brianna, both Senator Graham and Senator Cornyn left out really important context here. Senator Graham left the impression that Judge Jackson just generally called the government a war criminal in pursuing charges against terrorists. But no, Jackson actually alleged in 2005 that the government committed war crimes in its involvement in torturing and otherwise mistreating 4 Guantanamo detainees she had been assigned to represent as a federal public defender, all of whom were eventually released. Senator Cornyn was like, why in the world would you make her out to be some sort of lefty radical making wild allegations about Republicans in defending terrorists? In fact, this was a very specific allegation that very specific inhumane acts violated the Geneva Conventions. In addition, Jackson never explicitly called Bush and Rumsfeld war criminals. The phrase war criminals does not appear in any of these Jackson petitions. Now, it's a bit complicated, Brianna. She did argue that the respondents in her lawsuits committed war crimes. Bush and Rumsfeld were among the named respondents, but basically they had to be named as respondents in their official capacities under the rules for these kinds of filings. So people can debate how accusatory she was or wasn't here, but it's worth noting there was no sentence from Judge Jackson that says George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld are war criminals.
Yeah. The question really is torture a war crime, which I think John McCain, the late John McCain,
Sure.
certainly would have agreed with on that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Senator Ted Cruz on Jackson's sentencing record in child porn cases. Let's listen.
In United States versus Savage, the prosecutor asked for 49 months. You imposed 37. That was a 24% reduction. In United States versus Stewart, the prosecutor asked for 97 months. You imposed 57. That was a 41% reduction.
Okay, tell us about this one.
So there are two main things I think we need to know here. Number one, there are some key numbers that Senator Cruz did not have on his handy chart. He did not list what sentences the U.S. Probation Office, an arm of the court, recommended that Judge Jackson impose in these child porn cases. Figures released by the White House show that Judge Jackson's sentences were repeatedly right in line with that office's recommendations, and that she sometimes went higher in her sentences than the office recommended. Now, Senator Cruz correctly pointed out that the probation office reports were not publicly released to senators, but the White House did disclose the office's figures in these cases, and there's no reason to suspect that the White House is lying here. Now, number two, and Brianna, I think this is critical, it is totally normal for judges to impose sentences below the guidelines, let alone below what the prosecutors had asked for. There is a pretty broad view among judges that the sentencing guidelines for so-called non-production child porn cases, cases where the offender didn't make the pornography, are too harsh. In 59% of non-production sentences issued in fiscal 2019, the offender was given a sentence below the range of the guidelines. Less than a third of all non-production sentences that year were within the guidelines. So Senator Cruz is absolutely entitled to his sentencing criticism, but there is important added context here that shows that Judge Jackson is mainstream, not some sort of, lefty extremist.
All right, Daniel, thank you so much for taking us through all of that. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You and I both know that Donald Trump has an ego that is extremely fragile and brittle. He absolutely hates being made fun of by anyone, but especially people that he perceives as being on his team, on his side, in his camp, however you want to define it. When we make fun of him, it bothers him, but when his own people, conservatives, make fun of him, it absolutely devours him inside, which is why the following video I want to show you is so perfect. It combines mockery of Trump with actual clips of top conservatives tearing into him, and in the process, it makes every single one of them look like buffoons.
If you're tired and feeling lonely.
Every day, prominent Republicans across the country tell us the threat that Donald Trump poses to our democracy.
January 6th was a riot that was incited by Donald Trump.
President Trump is responsible for provoking the events of the day.
They say Donald Trump is out of touch with reality.
He was livid and shaking and, showed a detachment from reality.
But sadly, these same Republicans say they will vote for him again.
If the president was the party's nominee, would you support him?
Absolutely. The line of supporting Donald Trump starts behind me.
It's inconceivable to me that I wouldn't vote for the Republican nominee.
These Republicans are suffering from partisan derangement syndrome. At this point in the ad, I would tell you to call this number so you can help these deranged partisan Republicans. But sadly, they're too far gone.
Okay, cut.
Yeah? I mean, didn't Bill Barr just say verbatim that he's out of touch with reality? Right? And then they want to give him nuclear codes? What the f***?
So that's perfect. That is absolutely perfect. It's styled as one of those old ads where you're supposed to save the animals. It's got this sad tone being we have to save these Republicans who on the one hand quite correctly have criticized Donald Trump, calling him dangerous, calling him criminal, calling him mentally unstable, and then yet when asked saying, yes, I would vote for him again. Maybe he's not my first choice, but if he wins the nomination in 2024, I'm going to vote for him no matter what. Basically saying that while this man is a dangerous criminal maniac, he's still my guy at the end of the day. And so that makes Trump look bad because yes, in the one sense, maybe it shows Donald Trump that he still controls the Republican Party, but it has to be said said that all of these people think he's an absolute buffoon and loser, and they'll support him out of naked partisan desire and, this lust for power, but they don't actually love him or support him in any way, and will find some way to get rid of him. And it makes Republicans look terrible, because what it's saying is, yeah, they can acknowledge sometimes in public that Donald Trump is a menace. He's a literal menace to democracy and to the rule of law and to public safety, but you'll still vote for him because he's going to get you your judges and your tax cuts and your attacks on workers and minorities and anybody you don't like. And so this video, which is from a Republican group, it's called the Republican Accountability Project, destroyed Donald Trump. You love to see it.
I voted for Donald Trump. I voted for Trump because I thought he'd create a better America for everyone. But after reading 800 or so pages on queer feminist theory, I realize now just how much I've been duped. You gotta understand, I come from a small steel town in Pennsylvania. If I had known the foundational texts on intersectional theory, I would have never chanted, "Lock her up, lock her up." Lock her up, lock her up. We were told Hillary Clinton was the enemy, but it's clear now that the true enemy is a patriarchal, capitalistic society that maintains its ascendance by making powerful and ambitious women appear threatening, only to protect my status in a system purposefully designed to benefit cishet white men like myself. Jesus. When Donald Trump said he would make America great again, it's obvious to me now that he was only trying to play off my own complicity and comfort in an unequal social structure that disproportionately strips women and minorities, particularly trans and genderqueer people of color, of their autonomy and seeks to subjugate them to an invertebrate and intentionally antagonistic andocratic order. I get that now after I attended a gender-fluid, non-binary poetry slam at Swarthmore. A couple of other guys from work attended it too, and now it's all we talk about on the line. I like Trump because I thought he tells it like it is. But you know who really tells it like it is? Judith Butler. Gender is not to culture as sex is to nature. Gender is also the discursive, cultural means by which sexed nature, or a natural sex, is produced and established as predecursive prior to culture, a politically neutral surface on which culture acts. If I had just known that back in November, I would have never voted for Trump. God, how could I have been so stupid?
Let me begin today by apologizing in advance for the look and sound of the videos for the rest of the week. I am on vacation, but the news does not take a vacation, so we really don't get to either way. But that's okay, because there's still lots to discuss that happened over the last few days when I wasn't able to record, so let's get right into it. First and foremost, on Saturday evening, Donald Trump held another one of his little hate rallies in South Carolina, where he actually encouraged his supporters to, quote, lay down their lives in order to stop the teaching of critical race theory. Take a look at what Donald Trump told that hate-filled crowd in South Carolina. Here it is.
Anything. Getting critical race theory out of our schools is not just a matter of values, it's also a matter of national survival. We have no choice. The fate of any nation ultimately depends upon the willingness of its citizens to lay down, and they must do this, lay down their very lives to defend their country. If we allow the Marxists and communists and socialists to teach our children to hate America, there will be no one left to defend our flag or to protect our great country or its freedom. Just days ago.
Now, how is it that we as a country have allowed the dumbest people imaginable to be the ones that get to call the shots? Because honestly, that's the country we're living in today. 13 months ago, nobody in this country knew that critical race theory even existed except for a handful of academics, right? And now suddenly, every time we turn around, it's this big phobia. It's this big boogeyman monster that we're all supposed to be afraid of that, again, nobody really even knew existed 13 months ago. Yet this is what the Republican culture war has become today. You get these people riled up, and these are stupid people. I'm sorry. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to be nice to them. These are all very stupid people. They don't know what critical race theory is. And we know that because they've admitted it. We have seen interviews, state after state, even politicians on the right can't tell you what it is. They just know they're against it. So again, very stupid people, but they have the loudest voices, and they're the ones who get to call the shots. So this thing that's not actually being taught in any public school in the United States of America is a thing that now Trump is asking his supporters to go and die to prevent from happening. Which again, technically, that's a very easy request. Like, you have to be willing to die to make sure this thing that's not happening doesn't happen. So nobody has to lay down their life for it. But that's also an explicit call for violence. That's how I read that. When you hear Donald Trump say those words, you have to be willing to lay down your life. To me, he's telling them go fight to the death. Just like on the January 6th Stop the Steal rally, where he said, go fight like hell or you won't have a country anymore. I view that speech as absolutely no different than his January 6th speech. Same thing, slightly different words, same call to action. And we saw what happened on that day. God only knows what those crazed idiots will do this time. Thanks for watching, and if you like what you saw, don't forget to like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe to our Ring of Fire channel here.
Hi, I decided that at the end of every show for the next year, I would share excerpts from a book that I believe would enhance your life and make you a stronger thinker and problem solver. All characteristics that will help you win at life and raise stronger and healthy children. Many of you turn your nose up at reading, or you snub the advice that you must read in life to succeed, or you compare the cost of a book to getting a new pair of shoes or getting your hair done or your nails done. The reason why you make these cost comparisons is because you do not truly value a book. A book is a magnificent instrument that can change the course of your life and the lives of your children. In later shows, I plan to discuss with you how a book changed the lives of certain people. I understand that you do not earn a lot of money, and this money is valuable to you because of all the things you see advertised that you desire, and you do not want to spend a lot of money on a book. A new pair of shoes is more valuable to you than a book. If you truly cannot afford a book, then you need to go to the library and take your children with you for a day of reading. You must gird your loins and proceed at educating yourself. Some of you seem to think that having a conversation with your stupid girlfriend or your stupid boyfriend will help you more than reading a book, when actually having a conversation with your loudmouth girlfriend or loudmouth boyfriend is merely a cathartic, allowing you to blow off steam and proclaim how life has been so unfair to you. What you do not realize is that the advice coming from your do-nothing girlfriend or your do-nothing boyfriend is advice coming from a fool. Your do-nothing girlfriend is a sexual opportunist looking for a man she can impress with her body. When her vagina fails her, what will your girlfriend do but go to work at McDonald's or Wendy's at the age of 60 and continue to spread her ignorance at church? Her daughter will be on the street and her son in prison. she will never realize that her life is the result of the decision she made not to educate herself through reading. All her life, she felt that she had something better to do than reading. She had something better to do than reading with her children. She had something better to do than working with her children. And that was going to the bar, trying to entertain a man, or trying to find some man that would buy her a pair of shoes. A man spending money on her was more important than educating herself. In later shows, I'm going to spend a great deal of time giving you some examples of fools. These are people who think they are smart, willing to trade their body and integrity for a dollar bill. These people end up in the cemetery after lamenting each and every day of their lives about their unfulfilled dreams. Do not be upset by the use of the word fool. You tell me if a woman is not a fool to instruct her grandson to kill her husband for a $25,000 life insurance. Let that sink in for a moment. Instead of instructing her grandson to make something of his life, the grandmother instructs her grandson to become a murderer, to kill his grandfather. I have this anecdotal advice for you about reading. Listen to this short true story. A friend and I were talking. She said a woman she knew called her and sought to renew their friendship. During their conversation, the woman told my friend that President Trump had done so much for black people, and that's why she voted for him in 2016, and she was going to vote for him again in the upcoming election. My friend asked her a question. She said, "Tell me some of the things that Trump has done for black people." The woman said, "A whole lot." My friend persisted and asked her to name one thing that Trump had done for black people. The woman could not. The woman kept using the phrase, "a whole lot of things." My friend said after a while she stopped talking. Finally, the conversation was over and my friend hung up. My friend said, as she hung up, she made up her mind right then that she would never renew her friendship with this woman. Now ask yourself why. Why would she not renew her friendship with this woman? You can answer this question in 2 words. The woman was a poor thinker. She never investigated anything that was told to her. Whether you know it or not, a person who is a poor thinker, who does not examine his or her thinking, is a very dangerous person indeed. Think about it.
A discussion of the book, Life-Saving Advice. You cannot recognize a rapist just from his appearance. This book tells women how to analyze a man to find out whether he could be a rapist, abuser, or a murderer. It gives a voice to all women who have fallen prey to abusive partners and rapists. Throughout this book, women can know how to avoid being caught in their crosshairs. It hence seeks to solve by preventing instead of curing. Even after being abused, many women still stay in those relationships. Why? The book tackles that and gives courage to those that may be trapped so that they can escape from the cycle of violence and save their lives. Why should you read this book? It's informative. This book contains deep insight on how women are preyed upon, how they get defiled, and what they can do to avoid being a victim of rape or abuse. Women can know what to notice around themselves to ensure their own safety and of those around them. It also shows the stages that pass during the abuses so you can recognize when to stop. Speaks out for women. The book points out the dangers that women have to face on a daily basis and in social setups and decries them. It speaks to society to protect the women from predators that seek to defile them. Problem solving. The tips and pointers contained in this book are potent in solving the problem of sexual abuse. The book teaches women how to analyze social situations, from how they act to how others act, to spot any danger early on before it's too late. Relatable. It contains stories of women that have gone through rape or abuse from men, and so other women who are going through or have gone through them can understand that they can solve or resolve what they went through. Advises against gender-based violence. Men are implored to desist from such devious deeds as raping and abuse to women. Women are also given pointers on what to do to avoid getting to the point of being abused. Consoling. It teaches women how to escape from an abusive relationship without bashfully condemning them for being in those relationships. It gives them a way out and how to live after the awful experiences. Tackles important issues. Issues such as partner abuse and rape have been underplayed in society. This book openly talks to those issues and calls out to society to fix them. Women now can read unfiltered truth on how life can be cruel and how to go head-to-head against these challenges and still triumph. Advises fearful people that are affected. Most people who are affected by domestic violence, rape, or partner abuse are afraid of speaking out. They sometimes don't know where to go to escape those horrors. The book gives them a voice and courage to speak out and free themselves from the shackles of abuse.
This video was brought to you by the Women and Children's Restoration Ministries. Why not email us at murderedvoices@gmail.com and learn about the programs we have to assist women. We welcome women who wish to participate. Surely you have a few hours each month to help us with one of our programs. We believe that one of our programs, Recruiting Citizens, The Wall Project, Black Women in Cancer, Teach Someone to Read, will interest you, where you might volunteer once a month to help us. Our primary function is to assist women in changing their lives. Email us today. We would appreciate your help. Join us at the Women of Courage Show every Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. and every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. for information that will change your life. You can also visit us at our website, touchedbythelight.us, for more information. Thank you. If you do not